Hello, Knights fans, and welcome back to Charge On. Week 3, or no, episode 3. Week 3 is next week, but episode 3 starts right now. I'm your host, Sean Green. Again, just want to thank everybody for the support on the first 2 episodes. Really means a lot. Night Nation is crazy. And we've got a special guest to bring on for this episode. Big game, so big time guest, Jason Beede, Orlando Sentinel. It's funny, Jason, because I had you on my last show when I was starting up. That was for another Knights big game. And now new show, new network, have you on. And you moved from 247 to Orlando Sentinel, so you're at your new spot. Thank you for coming on, and how you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I remember coming on last time we talked. I don't remember which game that was for, but I do remember coming on in the past, and it's good to be back on for sure.
We appreciate you taking the time, and obviously Nick Geddes, every single week guest, co-host, etc., does everything. Nick, how you doing? How are you handling that USF beatdown? I know you're a UCF fan, but you were talking all this thing about UCF or USF could give UCF a run for their money. How you doing after that week 1 obliteration, I guess?
I think you're like mistaking me as this like USF homer. I am a UCF grad for the people out there. I'll reiterate that again. I will just keep it real that I thought USF would be much more equipped this year than they showed in week 1. So I'll take a little bit of an L there, but yes, I'm doing good, and we have a big UCF game to talk about. So that's where my focus is. I think
at this point we won't even mention the other team until maybe when we play them. I don't think there's any point in bringing them up at this point. So we'll just get into it. We'll stop talking about them, but big game on Friday, opening up the college football week. UCF taking on Louisville. Listen, I think, Jason, let's start off with you. Obviously, I think we were all a little shocked, watching Louisville last week. I don't think any of us could have assumed, especially going into what they played Syracuse last year. I mean, they killed Syracuse. This year, completely different, flip the script. What are your overall thoughts on that game and just your thoughts on Louisville as a team after that week 1 loss?
Yeah, I watched a good bit of that game just because I was curious how they would look. I was surprised that Malik Cunningham really wasn't able to have success moving the ball. It seems like they have some offensive line issues, and Syracuse was able to run the ball as much as they want, really. Their quarterback is mobile somewhat. Syracuse's quarterback, I don't remember the name, but he wasn't like John Rice Plumlee speed or anything like that, So UCF should have some good opportunity to run the ball and move the ball, and I think that Louisville lost, that performance, the way they lost, was really surprising to me. And then also, I don't know exactly how games are scheduled. I know that was an ACC matchup. It's kind of strange to me that, if you're the ACC, why would you want one of your top teams or supposed teams or one of your better teams, playing on a late Saturday night on the road, knowing you're going to have to go and travel to Orlando the next week. So maybe Louisville got a little bit screwed on the scheduling aspect of it, but nonetheless, I was surprised by that result for sure.
It was definitely surprising, right? Because we expect Malik Cunningham to be this, again, Gus said it, is one of the top quarterbacks in college football. And he just didn't look like that. It looked like it was a struggle on both sides of the football, not just on offense, but defense was a struggle. I mean, that Syracuse offense, give them credit. They look completely different from last year. But what do you kind of credit that to? Is it more Syracuse just being a much better, improved team? And we all know, Syracuse is not a football school. They've been usually terrible in football. Is it just Syracuse improving, or do you think Louisville losing some weapons, taking a step back?
I think it's a little bit of both. Maybe that's an easy answer, but I think Syracuse, like you said, they haven't been exactly great. I know Dino Babers is on the hot seat. That was almost who UCF hired instead of Scott Frost way back when. Maybe they made the right decision, but I think they've improved. The quarterback played pretty well, and defensively they were able to get some things done. So, maybe Louisville's taken a bigger step back than we had expected them to. So I'm not, again, I didn't watch a whole lot of Syracuse football last year, but I tuned in for the game on Saturday night, and I was impressed by what they had to show. So, the ACC is always kind of confusing outside of Clemson. Even Clemson last season, of course, they looked good. They looked relatively good against Georgia Tech, but it's interesting to see what happens Friday night. I'm sure they're going to bounce back, though.
And with that being said, I mean, UCF, we would all agree, is a much tougher opponent than Syracuse and a challenge that they presented, even though they beat up on them 31-7. And Malik Cunningham in particular, we've been talking a lot about him, obviously. And last year, if you go off of what he did to UCF, I think he had 365 yards or so by himself, almost 100 on the ground. And he really caused problems to that UCF defense. This is now year 2 under Travis Williams. I don't really take it was a good defensive showing, don't get me wrong, again last week, but I can't really take much of that away from from a lower tier opponent. Now going up against Malik Cunningham, what kind of changes do you think you've seen in this defense that tells you that they're more well equipped to handle a quarterback like Malik Cunningham?
Yeah, I think, obviously a big loss up front was Kalia Davis, who, got drafted, obviously. But when you have Ricky Barber back and Josh Salazar back, in addition to, some of the other guys, Tremont Morris Brash is playing again. He didn't really play against a whole lot against Louisville, coming off his suspension early last season. So to have a bunch of guys back in year 2 under Travis Williams, I understand what you're saying. It's a lower tier opponent, South Carolina State, but they did do well against the run. And I think, obviously SC State doesn't have the athletes Louisville does, but when you're playing sound defense and controlling the run, I don't think it really matters a whole lot. Obviously if it's like a top 5 team, but, for them to hold South Carolina State, I think it was like 3 or 4 yards a carry. That's pretty impressive considering they really struggled at times. But just not only stopping the run, but they got a sack, couple sacks. So that was something they struggled with early on last season. Took them a few games to get that. So that was a good early sign. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, Malik Cunningham, maybe he bounces back and does similar things to what he did last season. But I think because they have so much experience back, they've added a couple guys in the group as well. It should be interesting to see how they control him.
Speaking of UCF's running quarterback, John Rice Plumlee, obviously had a great game. I think nobody can contest that. We have all said, though, it is SC State. I was on your Orlando Sentinel show. I do agree with you. You said, listen, you can't discount what the game was. You just had to see him play in that quarterback role, and he's exactly who everybody thought he would be. What were your positive and negative thoughts? Because obviously there were some very positive takeaways from this game. But what are both positive and negative things that you could take away from that performance and going into, like it or not, a tougher opponent in Louisville?
Yeah, positively, I just think for him in this moment, it's big. I mean, you have to remember he was playing wide receiver and lost the starting role at Ole Miss. For him to make his first start in a couple of years, even though it is against a lower tier opponent, I still think, mentally and, you still have to make the right throws and be on target. And I thought he was fairly accurate. There were a couple drops by some of the receivers. I don't know how many of them were his fault per se. But, with that being said, he impressed me with some of the deep passes he had. That one play to Ryan O'Keefe. Of course, Ryan made a great catch to hold on to that ball, but, he still had to put the ball in the right spot, for that catch to be made. So that was impressive. And some of the touchdowns he threw were pretty impressive. I think the fact that in his first start, he, threw the most yards he's ever thrown for in his career, the most passing attempts in his career. And then on top of that, he ran the ball really well. I think negatively, some of those runs, it was because the pocket broke down and he had to escape, and maybe that's more on the offensive line. I think you'd like to see John Rice go through a couple more progressions, reading the field, looking for receivers, as opposed to just, hey, if my first option's not there, I'm just going to run for it. So I think that's something I noticed in the game. It didn't feel like he was, really, obviously when the pocket collapses on you quickly, you're going to have to run and escape. But I think I'd like to see him go through some more progressions like a, true quarterback. But with that being said, though, considering the circumstances and what he's overcome and transferring and not playing quarterback, as long as he did, it was an impressive game, no doubt.
And I came away really impressed, obviously, by John Rice, Javon Baker, but Kamori Gamble really impressed me as well. And I feel like he went a little maybe under the radar during the offseason because everybody was focusing on that quarterback competition. And we forget he comes in with his own pedigree, playing in the SEC, playing at Florida. I mean, Kyle Pitt's backup, right? And last year was his first year there, and he was rock solid and probably really tough conditions to play on that Florida team last year. Very impressive the other night. Do you think as this season goes on, they'll look to get the tight end more involved, because obviously in the years where UCF was really rolling, the tight end production was huge for them.
Yeah, you go back and look at that 2017 squad who they had, Jordan Akins,
Yep.
and he was just, an absolute weapon. Michael Couliable did some things as well, even though he wasn't as athletically gifted. But with that being said, Kamari Gamble, I agree. I think it was underrated, an underrated addition. Like you said, it was all about the quarterback battle, and that was obviously an important thing they had to decide. But you look at the tight end room, if they hadn't added Kamari, it's like no disrespect to Alec Holler. He did some things and obviously earned a scholarship and, really made a name for himself last season. But, Jordan Davis is recovering still and continuing to progress. And obviously Zach Marshall-Wilhan made his first career catch for a touchdown. But, Kamari Gamble having SEC experience, they really liked him, adding him from Florida. It was a really good addition, I think.
No, and again, the offense has had so many additions that it's a whole different offense from last year. Now, granted, injuries played a huge factor into last year, but the tight end group and the wide receiver group, including the running backs, you could see the improvement. You could see that, listen, this is a different offense, especially with how John Rice can play the position, and I think it's only going to go up from here. But are we now going to, because I've seen people online, like, listen, it's hard not to underestimate a team like the Cardinals after seeing that game, right? It's hard not to, because you're like, wow, we were thinking we're getting, a 42-35 game from last year. And, looking at that game, we'll go into it more later, but we were looking at that game and you're like, wow, like, this is going to be a shootout. Now you put up 7 points on the board in your week one with supposedly one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Is there a little problem of potentially underestimating this team given the score of the last game?
Maybe by the fans. I mean, when we talked with Ryan O'Keefe and Anthony Montalvo and even Gus on Monday, Ryan made it really clear he didn't think that's who they really were. I'm not sure if they had game planned incorrectly or things just didn't go their way. I'm not entirely sure why they struggled, but they did. And I kind of agree with Ryan. I don't think they're as bad as that. I still think we're going to get a really good game on Friday night. I don't know if it's going to be 42-35, but if you look at some of the numbers, I think UCF's a 6.5 point favorite, 6 point favorite at home. So the fact that this game is in Orlando, I think makes a big impact for sure. So we'll see. I mean, I think Louisville's probably better. I'd be pretty surprised. I mean, I'm not saying UCF can't win by a few touchdowns, but I'd be pretty surprised if it wasn't a single score result.
Yeah, I think if they're not better this week, then it might be a downhill season for Louisville. But final question before we let you go, a little bit more of a fun question because, I went to the game last week, and the number one talking point wasn't SC State. It was, oh my gosh, we get alcohol at the stadium this year. Everybody I saw had a drink in their hand. It was insane. I was like, wow, okay, like, Jason, I just want to get your thoughts, okay? Like, UCF fans, we love them. I love them. I am one of them. They can get a little crazy. I mean, we can get a little crazy at the game, bouncing. Do you think it was the best move to give fans at the bounce house alcohol? I think it makes it more interesting. There were some interesting, things that I saw, but wow, it makes the bounce house got a little bit more flair on game days, I would say. A little bit more flair.
I think, could it lead to more problems? Yes. I'm sure they had to hire more security and look at logistics of, how do you limit people? I know they can't buy drinks at a certain time. You can only buy a certain amount of drinks. I'm sure people take advantage of that for sure. But just financially, I think, when UCF added alcohol to baseball and softball games earlier this spring, I was really curious how many other schools in the American sold alcohol. And outside of the Naval Academy, UCF was the only school in the American Athletic Conference that didn't do that already, outside of club seats, of course. So
yeah,
I don't want to say they were falling behind, but I just feel like, sure, you're going to have some rowdy fans, you're going to have some, drunk people that are going to be rude and whatnot. But I just think, when you do it right, and you hire security and you limit how many purchases can be made, I think the pros outweigh the cons.
I would agree with that. Hey, it definitely made the game more interesting seeing some of the fans. I will say, like, some of the fans that already are at a 10, it brought them to like a 15. So I mean, you get a little bit of extra things, but you're in the press box. So like I've had the food in the press box, like it's pretty great. So you can just like watch from up there and see the crazy fans that we all love and respect. But Jason, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for taking the time, and let's go get a dub on Friday. How about that?
Absolutely. Should be a good one for sure under the lights.
Just want to thank Jason Beede again for coming on. Always a pleasure. We went to school with Jason. He's, done great things with Knights 247, then now moving on to the Orlando Sentinel. And we're so glad that he could take a couple minutes to come on the show. First guest that we've had on Charge On. So excited to get more as the season progresses, and love talking to Knights insiders. So I want to thank Jason Beede. And we're back with me and Nick. Before we get into what you guys all are waiting for, and if you want to just hear about the Louisville game and all that, that's coming up in a second. We have the timestamps below, so if you want to go to that, I understand. But me and Nick have to really get something off of our chests here. The college football rankings came out today after week 1. Nick, we talked about it last week, okay? None of us, me, you, and Rob, all said UCF would not be ranked even if they blew out SC State. They would not be ranked. We all said that, okay? What I didn't expect is how god-awful, you know what? That's not true. I did expect how god-awful the college football rankings committee is. They are abysmal. I mean, they are so bad that it's not even funny. So let's go through a couple of the big question marks on this college football rankings list, okay? Realistically, the top 10 is whatever. I mean, not that big of a deal, right? We'll talk about the Florida at 12, going from unranked to 12 in the span of 2 seconds, okay? Got Florida at 12. You move Arkansas up a couple spots to 16. I get that. That's okay. BYU, after beating USF, moves to 21. So they jump from 25 to 21 after beating USF. I think that's ridiculous. Houston at 25. I'm sorry. I know we want American teams to be ranked. I understand that is what UCF needs to move ahead and to move forward. But I'm sorry. Houston played absolutely atrocious. They should have lost the game. I don't think they should still be ranked in the top 25. Then we go into the non-ranked, because UCF is non-ranked. And you're telling me that Florida State University, I'm sorry, I get it, they beat LSU. LSU was trash last year. They were absolute trash. Get a new head coach, new offensive scheme, new defense. And you're telling me that you count FSU's win as UCF has been consistently good, and you're telling me that you're going to rank FSU ahead of UCF when I think if they played today, I think personally, I think UCF would beat them by at least 10. So Nick, I want to get your thoughts. Again, I get it. This is how life has been. Florida gets, I get it, a top 10 win. But if UCF got that same top 10 win, first of all, it was at home. Utah went to Florida. If UCF played Utah and beat them, UCF would go up to 20. And that's a fact. That is a fact. But because it is Florida and because it is SEC, they jump from unranked to 12. That is absolutely absurd, and they should be ashamed of themselves. I get a great win for Florida, and I'm not saying that it's not a good win. I'm saying it's absolutely ridiculous that a team can jump from unranked to 12 after 1 week when everybody had them unranked. That is absolutely absurd. I'll put the floor to you. I just think that is absolutely ridiculous.
I don't want to look past the victory of Florida because it might have been the most impressive victory of the weekend, right? The biggest upset of the weekend for sure. Mm-hmm. I don't want to discredit what Florida State did against LSU, regardless of the fact that LSU is an 11-12 program over the last 2 seasons, and the roster is just not there. I don't want to discredit those things necessarily, but all offseason we went into this discussion that UCF was probably the best of the 4 big teams in the state of Florida. I think that you could make a serious argument and maybe win that argument in the offseason. And what has changed? Florida got the signature victory over Utah. Florida State got the victory over LSU, which was probably a toss-up going into that game. You could have picked either team in there and everybody would have said, okay, I could see that, right? Miami beat up on Bethune-Cookman, which I expect them to do. And UCF did their job and beat up on South Carolina State, which we expected them to do. So really, what has changed for UCF to all of a sudden be viewed as the 4th team in that equation? And I know things change year to year, and I don't want to really live in the past, but, Florida did play UCF last year, and a lot of those players were on that team that are on this one. I understand there's different parts to that, Anthony Richardson being the most important one there. But UCF did beat that team, right? And Florida State, last time I checked, didn't even make a bowl game last year. It's a 5-7 football team under Mike Norvell. And I think I have more of a problem with Florida State being in front of UCF than any of this. I'll understand if you want to put Florida ranked, although I think 12 is certainly ambitious, despite what they did. I think that's ridiculous to be that high. I understand that. Miami has all the hype in the world, okay. But Florida State getting the same amount of votes as UCF, I think is unacceptable because Florida State still has a lot to prove, and they're going to enter the meat of the schedule, and we're going to figure out what happens with them. But I don't know what UCF has done to drop off like that in the minds of these voters in the state of Florida, other than the AAC typical, bias and on thereof.
That's what it is, Nick. That's what it is. And that's the frustrating thing. And thank God that there's only one more year to deal with it because it's absolutely insane. And I get it. They could say, oh, we had Houston, we have Houston still ranked. That's only because they won the game. Yes, you could say Cincy, okay, let's drop them down, right? They were 23rd, you drop them to 29, okay? Cincy didn't play bad. Against the number 9 team in the country, new offense, you have a new quarterback, you're not returning most of your starters, so it's a practically brand new team. Defense looked good. I mean, you played as good as you could have, and you're telling me that you dropped them from 23rd to 29? I think that is insane, number one. Number two, I do agree, right? And you are right. I don't want to discredit the wins. I think the Florida win, it is a really good win for them, a top 10 program win. Dan Mullen, that is one of the gripes that Florida fans had with Dan Mullen, is they felt like he can never win the big games that, were on their schedule and on their slate. So Billy Napier comes out and gets a dub right away. But jumping from unranked to 12, and basically I know what they did, because Oregon is now unranked. They're 26, so they just fall out. They basically just flopped the two. They moved Florida, because again, Oregon was 11, so they put Florida at 12, and they moved Oregon basically to unranked. But we both know Oregon will be ranked next week. They'll win, and they're a good football team. Yes, we get it. Bo Nix is Bo Nix. We know what to expect out of him. They were playing Georgia week 1 in Georgia. I mean, it blows my mind to think the bias is real, and this is why, even when UCF does go into the Big 12 next year, I will never look at an American team and say, if they're the same caliber, if they're a UCF level caliber team, I will never say, oh, they shouldn't be ranked. They don't play anybody. Absolutely not. I think, again, Florida State's win, it is a good win, a great win, especially for a program that over the last couple years under Mike Norvell has struggled to find those wins, has struggled to finish games, and a lot of people counted Jordan Travis out. They got that dub on a blocked extra point.
I mean, it's true.
Good for them.
It's true, but, I think the voters have shown to us at this point, it took for the committee at the final hour last year to put an undefeated Cincinnati in, right? And yeah, did it turn out well for them against Alabama? No. Other than Georgia, was it going to turn out well for anybody last year? No. But I think the perception is there, hey, we put one of y'all in, okay? And you fell flat on your face. And unfortunately, that stigma is always going to carry with the AAC. It's just the way it is. I mean, you have one ranked team in there right now in Houston. And again, Houston and UCF, they'll have their day on the field. And I think right now, though, I think UCF's a better team than Houston. I mean, if you ask me right now, put them on a neutral site right now, who would I pick? I would probably pick and lean towards UCF winning that game.
But they won't even play. Like, I don't think Houston's not on our schedule. We will play if we get to the American Championship. Yeah, you most likely will play Houston if that's the case. But I mean, it's frustrating. It is what it is. But UCF fans, here's the kicker. Okay, we were talking last week. Okay, you get this win at SC State, and then you go beat Louisville. You're ranked. No,
and here's the thing,
because Louisville's just not as good of a team.
Like, does being ranked really mean much in the grand scheme of things, honestly? Because, like, and my argument with that is this. UCF's, unless they go undefeated, right? Unless they go undefeated and things happen and go their right way, likelihood of them making the playoff, probably very slim to no chance, correct? Right?
Yeah.
And that's the goal for every program, or at least it should be. I know it's Gus Malzahn's goal. After that, your goal is to really be the highest ranked team to get the bid, the group of 5 bid into one of the big bowl games, correct? And I'm looking at things right now. Who is the highest ranked team not in the Power 5 at the moment? It's legit Houston. That's it. That's the only team that's not in the Power 5, excluding BYU, who's the independent, that is in the top 25. So I think that's more important for UCF is you just need to control your schedule, win your games. You'll get ranked eventually, but if they want to if we get later in the year and UCF has 1 loss and there's some teams that are in the SEC that have 3 losses and they're ahead of UCF, we've been down that road before. And at this point, it's just about winning your games and trying to get that group of 5 bid.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I think, winning the American is number one. We haven't won in a couple years. That's the main goal. Getting that group of 5 bid to get, the big bowl game is important. I think, and again, you're right. Rankings necessarily are not the most important thing, especially in week 1. And they aren't. I mean, I think there's a respect level, though, that I think is the one frustrating thing for UCF fans is that listen, we all said we didn't think we were getting ranked after week 1. We knew that. You're not beating anybody. You're already not ranked. You're not going to move up, right? I think the frustrating thing is you didn't move up. You are now ranked as the fourth worst. And, a bunch of Florida fans and FSU fans and Miami fans will, oh, yeah, of course you're ranked 4th. But let's be real here. You guys have been trashed for years. UCF has been the one that's carried Florida in this state for years because you guys have all been trash. The only one that's been of decent playability is Florida when Dan Mullen was there. And all you Florida fans can act like Dan Mullen was so bad. Man was good for his first couple of years, brought you the most wins you've seen for a while. So let's not forget that, okay? So I think it's that. It's the frustration. And listen, I'm sure if UCF handles their business, they'll be ranked, and it is what it is. I'm just saying, now with the playoff expanding to 12 teams, and we've spent way too long on this topic, so I apologize to all UCF fans. If you have moved on to our UCF stuff, I'm glad you did. I'm just frustrated because it's the factor that we're not going to get respect in that sense until next year, where you're in the Big 12, even though, again, we look at the Big 12 and we're like, UCF right now would be a top 5 team in the Big 12. So that's all we're going to say on this. Hopefully after this week, if UCF handles their business, and we're about to talk about that, hopefully we see some movement where UCF can just keep on progressing. Yeah, so enough about college football rankings and all that stuff. I'm tired of talking about it. Though UCF did move up 2 spots, it's still frustrating being the number 4 team in Florida, according to the rankings, not actually in talent. But let's welcome on other co-host, guest, Robert Husby. Rob, how excited are you for this game against Louisville? It's a big game at home. I know we're going to be there. All 3 of us will be there. How pumped are you to get to this game?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think everybody's excited for this one. When we were previewing UCF season last week, I think we all kind of agreed that Louisville is one of the more exciting matchups that we get to see this year. Obviously, UCF lost to Louisville on the road last year, so UCF's looking for a little bit of redemption. I mean, I don't think Louisville's like a great team by any means, but they got an exciting quarterback, and they definitely can give UCF a little bit of a problem. I think of the available teams that UCF has to play this year, Louisville's definitely one of their tougher ones. So, I think everybody's looking forward to this one because, again, Louisville's also like a legacy team. Lamar Jackson went there. So it's exciting to see a team like Louisville come to UCF and get a pretty decent matchup up against a team like Louisville.
Yeah, and we'll get into it right now. But, we talked with Jason Beede. It's very obvious, right? They got smoked by Syracuse. Before I go to you, Nick, I'm going to kind of just break down the last 2 years of Syracuse versus Louisville. So we're going to go to 2021, all right? This was a huge Louisville win. They killed them. I think Syracuse only had 3 points. I think it was 41-3 was the final score. Louisville absolutely dominated. Malik Cunningham, he threw for 209 yards, 4 touchdowns, ran for a touchdown. So he had 5 total touchdowns against the Syracuse team. The quarterback of Syracuse, he was 10 of 18 and 46 yards. For 46 yards in 2021. He was not good. He was terrible. Louisville smoked him. Last week, that happened. I mean, there's no denying it. 31-7. It looked like a completely different football team. Syracuse, dominated both lines of the ball. That same quarterback, Garrett Schrader, that threw for 46 yards the year before, threw for 236 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also carried the ball for 94 yards and a touchdown. Malik Cunningham, last week, threw for 152 yards and 2 interceptions, and he only ran for 34 yards on 13 attempts. And Louisville had 3 turnovers. Now, the Qs have new offensive coordinator, Robert Anai, so, he's coming. I forgot what school he's coming from. I'm blanking right now. But they have a new offensive coordinator, new system. So, again, you could blame maybe the offense scoring more, and Louisville's defense, let's not get it wrong. Like, we did put up 35 last year on them. Up and down type of defense. But, with that being said, Malik Cunningham did not look like Malik Cunningham that I think we all assume that he is. Didn't look like the same quarterback. But, Nick, I'll go to you. Talking about the weapons that Louisville has and the problems that Malik Cunningham can present, do you still view Louisville the same way as we did a week ago? Because I even put that this was a loss for UCF, and I'm even reneging because I'm like, looking at that team, UCF, I believe, is the much better team and has the much better roster.
Yeah, well, just to clarify there, the offensive coordinator is Dwayne Ledford, who came from Notre Dame as the running back coach. So first-time offensive coordinator, I believe. So it's definitely an adjustment there. But Malik Cunningham, he's a fifth-year senior, right? He got the COVID year and was able to return. You look at the way he ended last year on a tear, and in that Syracuse game last year in particular, which took place in the final 4 games of the season, he was fantastic. So it's hard to figure out what went wrong there for him. But it wasn't pretty, but they still did some good things on offense, I thought. When you turn over the ball 3 times on the road, it's hard to win football games. I think it's that simple.
They had 334 yards of total offense, so they did move the ball.
Yeah, they moved the ball. It's just when you turn it over, you're not going to win football games. But yeah, I think that you're going to get a much better Malik Cunningham and a much better Louisville because there's only so much. You can only go so far up, right, based on what you did against Syracuse. There's so much room to go up. So I think you are going to get a renewed effort out of Louisville. I think we'd be naive to say that we're going to get the same one we saw last week.
Yeah, and you are right about the new offensive coordinator. I was talking about the offensive coordinator for Syracuse. So the year goes by, Robert Anai comes in, and he absolutely changes that Syracuse offense. But yeah, with Louisville, new offensive coordinator, is there still that growing pain? There shouldn't have been much change from last year. They did have a good offense. They did lose games. Let's not get it wrong, but I think that a lot of us believe that was mostly because of the defense. The offense, again, when they played us, they put up points. Rob, looking at the game from last year, so Louisville this year has 17 stars returning, 10 from the defense. I think we can say that the defense is one of the big problems. They do not force turnovers. They did in the game against us last year, but looking at last year, Malik Cunningham obviously went off. 265 yards passing, ran for 99 yards and 2 TDs, 501 yards of total offense. That is in year one of Travis Williams' new defense. I think we can all agree that the defense, again, we've been saying it, looks a lot better and looks more explosive and fast. What does UCF's defense need to do to kind of slow down Malik Cunningham, regardless of how he played last week? Because they're going to be looking, listen, you get beat like they did last week, regardless of who you're playing. They're going to be looking to play much better football this week.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think this is where UCF's defensive line comes in to play heavily, because that's who's, got to put pressure on the offensive line, got to put pressure on Malik Cunningham. You got to stop him from running. You got to stop him from making those good throws. So the defensive line comes in huge for UCF. And I honestly, again, grain of salt, it's SC State last week, but I thought probably the strongest unit on the field last week for UCF was the defensive line. I mean, we saw that goal line stand by the linebackers and the defensive line on that 80-yard fumble recovery last week. I think the defensive line is key to how you stop Malik Cunningham and Louisville's offense on Friday. I don't think there's one more important unit than the defensive line right now, and we got a small glimpse of them against SC State. Looked great. Very promising things to come. So you don't necessarily have to have the secondary pick them off and, force turnovers and stuff like that. But I think getting the defensive line in there, getting the linebackers in there is going to be very key to UCF's defense, stopping, both Malik Cunningham on the run and in the air.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing that I think if we're looking at UCF win, and let's go into our thoughts and predictions, because again, I think there was a lot more to talk about like going into this game before the Syracuse game. I think if they go out and prove to Syracuse like we're still who we are and we're going into UCF, into the bounce house 1-0 after beating Syracuse, regardless of the team, I think we're having a completely different conversation. But because of the game, we're looking at this game differently. I think Louisville right now might be one-dimensional. If you look at the game last week, Malik Cunningham did not run the ball well. He was stopped pretty much every time. 13 carries, 34 yards. That's not Malik Cunningham. He ran over pretty much 100 against us last year. Mm-hmm. I think Louisville is one-dimensional. I think if you can stop the quarterback runs and get him getting out of the pocket and getting yards, I think they're not going to be able to throw the ball. I think if you stop that run, Malik Cunningham becomes a one-dimensional quarterback. That's the way it looks. And I mean, until he shows it this season in this new offense, that's just how it's going to be. They had the 3 turnovers, so UCF's defense has a chance to, create some of those turnovers, especially in the backfield. And yeah, creating pressure, that's going to be important. And making sure those linebackers are on the same page with each other. So as soon as Malik goes out of the pocket, they're bouncing on him. And I think if that happens, then this bounce house is going to be rocking on Friday. I think it's a win. Right now, I'm going to say it's a 38-17 UCF victory. That's kind of my thought process right now. That might change. But yeah, I'm changing my preseason prediction for the loss, and now I'm giving UCF the dub to go 2-0. Nick, what are your thoughts and predictions on the game? Also, line is 6.5. I'm going to say that's the over, or I'm going to take UCF at -6.5. I think they will cover that. So, Nick, what are your thoughts and predictions and your final score prediction for the spread?
Well, real quick, I'll tell you about, you said one-dimensional offense. I think the one thing we haven't mentioned yet, and I think this is the biggest matchup to zero in on, is going to be Tyler Hudson versus the UCF cornerbacks. Because, a lot of people aren't talking about Tyler Hudson, but he's probably one of the more underrated, underappreciated receivers in college football, which is saying something because last year, as a sophomore, almost 1,300 receiving yards, averaging 20 yards a catch and 8 scores. In last week, he was still good, 8 for 102. So he was still able to get open in a down effort by their offense. So I think Justin Hodges, who played really good against South Carolina State, Devad Wilson, the veteran, whichever guy is matched up on them has to really be mindful because this guy can get vertical. He can get vertical. So I'm zeroing in on that matchup is what Travis Williams has schemed up, and I'm sure he'll have something in store. Score prediction. I did pick UCF to win this game when we did our preview last week. I'm going to stick by that, and I'm going to go 41-24. I think it's going to be close going to the fourth, and eventually UCF with the crowd behind them, make enough defensive plays, maybe force a turnover, and I think they win it by 2 scores.
All right. Yeah, that's a solid prediction. I think we all think that there's going to be a lot of points scored on our part. It's just how good this defense is, and it's your first really good test against, we still believe Malik Cunningham is a really good quarterback, and I'm sure they'll figure that offense out. And I think Devontae Brown will be matched up on him at the cornerback position because Devontae Brown played great. Making sure that they don't get beat over the top, though. I mean, that's going to be Devon Wilson's job, especially on Friday. Rob, I know you picked UCF to win this game, but now after seeing Louisville play, seeing the team that they are, what are your thoughts, predictions, and if they can beat that 6.5 spread?
Yeah, I think UCF definitely covers that spread. I'm not trying to copy Nick, but I definitely think UCF wins by at least 2 scores. We saw Louisville's defense last week not look great, and it wasn't great last year either. So I think UCF's offense is much more dynamic than it was last year. I think that's a point we've really made to start the season. So I definitely think we're going to be putting points on them on a pretty weak defense that returned 10 players. But I also think at the same time, UCF's defense, this is going to be a test because Louisville does have the offensive capabilities to put up a high score. So while I think it will be somewhat close throughout the game, kind of like Nick said, I think UCF will be able, with their offense, to sort of separate from the pack a little bit and be able to run up the score a little bit on Louisville's defense. I don't think it's going to be as close as it was last year. It'll still be a high-scoring game, certainly much more of a high-scoring game for both teams compared to a pretty one-sided affair against SC State. But ultimately, I think UCF's defense will be able to contain Malik Cunningham a little bit better this year, and I think UCF's offense is going to be able to score on Louisville's somewhat weak defense. So I have UCF winning by at least 2 scores as well.
It should be interesting. I think I know it's the second week, but this might be the most important game on the schedule until Cincy. I mean, this is really going to shape the type of team that this is, how they handle adversity, and how they have, Louisville's still a decent team, a good team, with a very hard quarterback to stop. So this is a very important game for UCF. We will all be there and experience the Bounce House live. Love this atmosphere on Friday is going to be insane. We all know it. Big games, the fans show out. So we are really pumped for that. Thank you for tuning in to the 3rd episode of Charge On. Again, we really appreciate all the support. Follow us on all of our socials down below. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, give the 5-star rating, do whatever you do. I know that everybody says that, but YouTube, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. We appreciate the support and hope you come back. Our next episode will be on Saturday, bright and early. We will be posting right after a UCF dub. That's it for Charge On. Go Knights. Charge On. See you guys Saturday.